Hello, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to my office. It's a beautiful new day, and it's time for a new episode. Today's episode is really exciting for me because this is someone who is currently studying in my hometown in Seattle, and we just connected really quickly over some core belief structures and core worldviews, and it was just a absolute pleasure to talk to them. We talked about novel approaches to research. We talked about what community means. We talked about the state of academia and the importance of diversity and interdisciplinary and intersectional studies in academia. It was a really uplifting episode to record because it's so easy in today's day and age, especially in the United States, to kind of feel down about education as the Department of Education gets dismantled and as academia is attacked over and over and over again. This conversation really was uplifting and encouraging and enlightening to see the direction that things can go. Even though academia is deeply entrenched in a lot of traditions and a lot of epistemologies, a lot of ways of knowing and ways of finding knowledge, we are on the precipice of something new and something exciting. As these generational turnovers happen in academia, big things are going to happen. So today's guest is Isaac Sanders. Isaac Sanders, MSW, is a visionary consultant, researcher, and public scholar working at the intersections of technology, care, and collective liberation. Grounded in their lived experience and identity as an Afro-Indigenous, two-spirit, non-binary person, Sanders is at the forefront of transforming social work and public systems through community-rooted, justice-driven innovation. With expertise spanning youth homelessness, LGBTQ plus advocacy, child welfare reform, and AI ethics, Sanders integrates critical theory, participatory research, and systems thinking to reimagine futures where marginalized youth are not only heard, but also led. Their work explores how machine learning, human-centered design, and radical imagination can be mobilized to dismantle harmful institutions and build sustainable ecosystems of care. As a PhD student and former frontline practitioner, Sanders brings scholarly rigor and deep community accountability to every project. Through digital storytelling and social media content, they make research accessible and culture shifting. Their platform invites people to see themselves as researchers, artists, and agents of change because knowledge belongs to all of us. Whether consulting with national organizations, leading participatory action projects, or teaching abolitionist methodologies, Sanders is committed to a future where Black, Indigenous, queer, and trans youth thrive in data, in policy, and in practice. Let's get to the episode. Everyone, please welcome Isaac Sanders. But yeah, I should probably put this down because I have no idea. Can you hear me doing, like, fanning myself through
I
the...
can't. So I think you should keep doing what you need to do because it's hot. It's
It is
hot.
hot and it's June. Like, what is August gonna be like?
I don't know. I feel like it being this hot is homophobic at this point, and I feel like they're doing it in June. Who's doing it? I don't know. The higher powers are deciding that like being homophobic in June is like the new answer, and so they're just gonna make us hot, which also is not homophobic because we get to go outside with less clothes on. I think that's truly
That's
always
true.
the goal.
That's true. I mean, and there are places in like the South, like Florida and not California, but like Florida and really hot places that do their Pride in October. And now I'm understanding why.
Yeah, the Palm Springs Pride being in the middle of October feels correct on multiple
Yes.
levels.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Ugh, I at this point I'm just dreaming of moving to a cold place and living the rest of my life in a place that doesn't get above 60 degrees because that would be lovely.
See, it sounds nice until it's like -7 in the middle of
See, I'll
winter
take
and
it.
you just don't
I'll
know how
take
to
it.
act. No,
I'll take it because then I could wear like a sweater and a coat and a scarf and a hat and look really cute and layered.
you're right. I can't take my skin off. So I guess like I'd have to take the
Exactly.
cold. I'd have to take the cold.
Exactly. Well, okay, so let's stop complaining a little bit because if we talk any further, I'm gonna have to discuss my tan lines that are really awkward. So we're not going to talk about that. And those of you watching this on YouTube, you're welcome. You get to stare at those this entire time. No, I'm not wearing makeup. That is just how the sun has treated me. Uh, but just as a way to get into our conversation today, could you tell me a little bit about your academic journey, like how you got into academia, why you're going so far in it, like what's that about?
Yeah, okay. So to talk about this journey, I have to talk about it from the very beginning of just like having a family. So I grew up all over the place. I was a military brat. And so my mom moved me every 4 years, and it was a little destabilizing, but I also learned that I can go anywhere and be okay. So I can have a conversation with anyone and hopefully be safe enough to like be myself and be authentic. And so I was lucky to have that journey. But I had a grandmother who was just like, education is the great equalizer. If you don't get a degree, like people won't respect you. You have to go to school. And I took that to heart. And so as I was going through school, I was good at school, aka I was able to like get A's and B's when I was in elementary, middle, and high school. And I did like my AP classes, and I was like, I'm good at school. Like these are the things I do. And so my whole entire goal was to go to college to run track. And I got a track scholarship and went to school. And by the end of my freshman year, I had a 1.7 GPA. It was like real bad. And I was like on the verge of dropping out of school because I was just like, I'm not smart. I don't understand this. And what I learned was I loved learning, but I hated academia because of the structure of it. And it just didn't
Mhm.
fit into the way that I process things or was able to do my work when I was in high school. And so I turned the wigs around as like they say in Dreamgirls and figured it out and kind of graduated with my little 3.0. But the things I wanted to do required me to have a master's degree. And I was told by all of my professors, you need to wait, you need to like do some like work in the field, and then you can go back and get your MSW. And I am an Aries. And so I identify as angry and combative and competitive at all points in time. Chaos chooses me. I do not choose chaos. And I immediately applied for grad school and got in and it was like, haha, fuck y'all. I got there. And went to grad school, once again was in that like realm of I hate academia, but I absolutely love learning. And I was lucky enough to be in this like group of Black queer PhD students and like folks who were faculty. And I was like, wow, like this is really nice. Like y'all are having a good time. Like why do y'all get to do your own research? Why do you get to just like like do the thing that you want to do and people don't really push you? You just get to like argue that what you're doing is important. And so I just started saying I was going to get a PhD, and I graduated, I moved to Seattle and was like, I'm gonna work in the youth homelessness as like I was saying I was gonna do, but like eventually I'm gonna go back and get my PhD. I kept telling people that every time I got like a new job, they'd be like, well, what's your 5 year plan? I'm like, I'm eventually gonna get my PhD. So I just kept telling people that over and over again. And I got this fellowship through a local philanthropy group, and also the person who was running it happened to be one of my old supervisors, and they gave us a stipend to like like what is it, like level up, like kind of take our career to the next level that we wanted to go. And everybody was talking about what they were going to do, and it got to my turn and my old supervisor just simply goes, yeah, I was going to like apply for a PhD program. I'm tired of them constantly talking about they're going to go get their PhD, so that's what they're going to do with this money. And I was like, Okay, I guess that's what we're gonna do. And I was like on the fence for a little bit, and then my like light in the world, my grandmother, she passed away in August of 2022, and I was applying at the like in December, and one of the things that she always told me was that she was going to come to every single one of my graduations. And there was something that kind of clicked in my brain where I was like, I don't have all the time in the world to just kind of lollygag and like not follow my dreams. Like deferring your dreams for so long will eventually get you to like a dreamless place. Like you'll feel empty and like you never strive for all the things that you wanted to go for it. And so I immediately applied. I got in and now I'm here. And once again, I'm in this place where I hate academia, but I really love learning. And it's been a journey trying to navigate those like kind of like do the balancing between I need to do these things so I can graduate and become like a doctor in like philosophy and like be able to like do the work that I want to change the systems that I work within, but also doing it in a way that feels correct for me and how those things never kind of cross over. And so that is where I'm at right now and trying to figure it out and constantly in progress around it. So one of my friends constantly say like, "This is a thought that's in draft," and I feel like my whole entire life since I started this PhD program has been in draft. And although I've published some articles, those also sometimes feel like they're in draft. And I know in 3 years I'll go back and read them and be like, "That was absolutely garbage, and I need to do better." But 2025 Isaac's not going to be 2028 Isaac, and that's just what it
Hmm.
is.
Well, I think that's an important thing to note too, is that further degrees, I liked what you said about when you were hanging out with people who were getting their PhDs and how they seemed joyful and they got to kind of do what they wanted to do and things like that. I think that's something that isn't talked about a lot because people hear, oh, you're getting a master's degree, oh, you're getting a PhD, that sounds so hard. And it's like, yeah, but I'm also working on things I'm actually interested in. It's not like an undergrad where you're having to take math and science and all of these things that you're not necessarily focusing on. At least for me, it'd be math and science, things that, that I'm not good at necessarily, or interested in expanding my knowledge of at the moment. Um, so when you go into those higher degrees, you get to just focus in on the things that you know you're good at, that you're actually interested in, and it makes it so much more enjoyable in a way, because even though you're working within these regimes of power that have been set down in tradition, you're still able to kind of pull into that dream, to pull into what gets you functioning in the morning, to keep you going, rather than, okay, so I wake up on a Monday morning and now I have 6 classes I have to go to and I like one of them. Great.
Yeah, it's the prerequisites of like the things you have to get done that I think makes academia and like education really hard because it's not that they're making you do these because you're interested in it. It's like these are things you have to know. And I always go back to the like, you don't need to understand algebra in your everyday life. And then now I'm in a PhD program and I actually need to understand algebra and all of these things. I'm like, oh no. I made a choice. Like this is all bad. Statistics is really hard, and now I like have to code and do all these things because that's just like part of the work. But I tell people all the time, like master's programs and PhD programs, they're teaching you how to do a role in society. They're not
Mm,
just like getting a bigger degree. And so I'm learning as a PhD student how to be a researcher or how to be a teacher to like higher education, but that doesn't mean that I am like the smartest like person in the room or like the like nicest tool in the shed. Like I am not like necessarily novel in the way that I think. It's just that I have ideas and I know that I have to do something in a specific way to get there. And so I'm learning
mm,
that process, not necessarily creating anything new or like thinking in any like different ways. Like that's what the classes are for. And I think the freedom of like going to a whole bunch of theory classes or like methodology classes that like feel good and want like are telling me how to do this thing in a way that like is more interesting or more intersectional are more liberating rather than like sticking to this positivist like framework of like if I can't see it visually with my eyes, that I can't prove it with numbers, that like it's not real. And it's just like I can do so much. I think one of the articles that not, I don't think, I know that one of the articles I did was like academic poetry, and I was like, I didn't know that was a possible thing I could do. And when I got to do that, I was like, I can do basically anything in academia, and they
Mhm.
could be like, this is research, because it is. And I think that was like a really good pivoting point for me of being like, research doesn't have to look like numbers and data and like case studies. It can be those life like giving event like things that you can do, and you can make that balance happen, although the expectation is you have to do the numbers and the like rigor and the validity, because it's important to be able to say like I put in this work to come to this conclusion, because facts and words mean things. So I say all of that to say like you can do both, you can do that little dance, but you're eventually going to have to do the hard thing, as we all know, as people who just like work in this world, that eventually, you're gonna have to do the hard thing. It's just like getting to it. Doesn't have to be all like bad. Like it's not all bad. Like there's
Yeah.
parts of academia I guess I do like it's structured and I understand it. But you just get through it and make it work.
Oh yeah, as a Virgo, I understand your Aries in that having a structured plan is very helpful, and then like give me some structure and then let me do what I want with it.
Exactly.
Well, and it's so encouraging as I'm embarking on this journey in this podcast, it's so encouraging hearing so many people talking about um, kind of novel ways of novel methodologies and novel ways of researching and getting information, gathering information. I remember years ago, out of my first master's, I was applying to doctorate programs in opera. And what I was proposing was I wanted to mount a production of two operas that were written by a feminist composer, and during the course of those productions interview the players,
Mm.
and my entire study would be based off of the interviews of the people acting in those operas to see what their experience is of those roles and how it changes and all of that sort of thing. And I remember going into the interview for that. I didn't end up going because I decided to do something else. Um, but uh, when I went into the interview for that, they were flabbergasted that I cared about my performers and what they were thinking. And this was just in 2014, and they
Mm.
were just like, "This is such a new way of thinking, and people aren't researching like this, and it's so exciting, and blah blah blah." Um, but then I decided to do a PhD instead of a DMA, and they were like, "Oh, never mind, we don't have room in that program." Um, but but it is. I am realizing that more and more people are going the research route in terms of interviewing people and leaning on experiences as method. And it's so exciting because I feel like for so long we've been so bogged down in numbers, and we've been so bogged down in quantifying everything, that qualifying things is has gone by the wayside. And so it's so encouraging to me that so many researchers are thinking about the people that they're researching rather than using them for statistics, and instead saying, okay, these are actual experiences. Like, so you sent me an article. The article with the research poetry was so exciting because I had never heard of that, and I never had thought about poetry as a research method, and it's so cool. Could you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, so I was working with Professor Meg Paisley. I think they're at the University of Columbia now, but they were someone who I met when I was getting my master's degree. and they were also a social worker, but like did research around queer and trans youth in rural areas. And I was like, this is really awesome because I haven't ever heard of social workers thinking through this and like trying to grapple with things other than like, what does this system do and how do we make this program better? But actually being like, let me go talk to queer and trans youth in rural areas, let me talk to their families and figure out like what do they need to survive outside of going to a giant city to get services because that's not always an option. And so the precursor article was just going through the interviews and the case studies around youth and their parents trying to navigate healthcare as like trans youth in I think it was like like the area was kind of like the middle of the country, so like Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri. um, but I remember us finishing that, and I was the part like just like, oh, that was really cool. I talked about programmatic shifts and like different ways to think through these ideas from like what we can learn from the West Coast and the East Coast, even though the Midwest is so broad and it has different transportation methods. And then Professor Paisley was like, "Hey, I'm working with some other students to write this academic poetry thing, and because you worked on this other study, I think it would be really great for you to be a part of this." And I was like, "Academic poetry? Walk me through what this is." Like, well, the way that we're like looking at this is like we're gonna take all of these transcripts, and then we want to tell a story by splicing out like their different quotes and then putting it together. So like what does this embody? What story is it being told? And we were able to make three that like touched on family, touched on religion. The religion one is the one that was the wildest for me. And then touched on identity. And being able to talk through or tell the story of multiple people through quotes and through um just like our own vibe and our interpretation was really powerful, but then also being able to talk to other people about what they're thinking and why they came to this conclusion, and having kind of this check between the experiences of all like we were all queer and non-binary folks who were reading through these articles and like reading through these transcripts and just being like, yeah, like it's really interesting that they really are talking a lot about religion. And all of us were like, we're not extremely religious people, but this is their story, and we can't warp the importance of religion in their trans experience. Like, we just can't do that. And
Yeah.
being able to have to check myself and be like, just because I feel some type of way doesn't mean that the story is going to tell me that. And so I think throughout a lot of the work and the work I've been doing in the field, but also through the research that I'm thinking through, I have gotten to a point where I'm like, I love being like surprised or confused or told I'm wrong by the research that I'm doing, because I'm constantly being told by the media that like, oh, religion is like a scary place for queer people, and like all of them tapping into like God made me this way to be trans, and I'm like, oh, hold on, like wait, like the polarizingness of it all. But like the stories and that research that we did are not the ones that are mainstream. We're
Mhm.
usually getting like pieces of the facts, not the whole entire picture. And so it was fun doing that qualitative research. It's very fun to me to just do qualitative research personally, because when I was in my qualitative class in my first year, they were like, well, Isaac, what happens first is like we look at the numbers, and then from the numbers we find the problem, and then we start doing qualitative research. And I was like, that feels off, that feels wrong. I feel like we need to look at an experience first, and then we can talk about like how this is a phenomenon that's happening with large waves of people through the
Mhm.
numbers. But like, why wouldn't I ask the community and ask for the stories before I start looking at numbers? Although numbers can also tell stories, and we can talk about that a little bit more, but it's weird to me that the narrative is the last piece that's talked about, not necessarily like the oh my God, look, like this many homeless people are experiencing this thing. Let's go and ask them questions now. That feels really extractive, and it doesn't feel like it's
Mhm.
in the process in the way that actually is rooted in community and care.
Well, I think part of that goes back to the roots of this kind of research in that I keep hearing over and over again to come up with research questions, and then you have to pursue those no matter what. And so your hypothesis has to be proven. And so thinking about what you just said, it makes sense that you would then start with the numbers and have to come to specific conclusions and then go out and try to fit what you're seeing into those conclusions, versus what I found during my master's thesis was I went in with a general idea of what I wanted to talk about and a time period and a group of people I wanted to specifically look at. And then over the course of doing interviews, I realized that all of my hypotheses were incorrect and that everything that I thought I was going to find was wrong. Um, and in fact, a lot of things ended up being the polar opposite of what I had assumed it was going to be. And then that shift is what made up my research. And so my
Mhm.
my thesis ended up being a good portion of the discussion was, here's what I thought I was going to find, but in reality it was this. And I think that that ability to transform one's research over time is not something that is lauded as often as it should be in academia, and it's not something that's really considered a lot. I think it's a new idea to let your thoughts change over time.
Mhm.
Like it feels like there's just this need to be authoritative and say, no, this is exactly how it is, rather than saying, actually, that's what I thought it was going to be, and it turned out to be this other thing. And in fact, I'm working on continuing that research because I'm still obsessed with that topic. And I
Mhm.
was just thinking to myself earlier today as I'm working on setting up even more interviews, and I was just thinking to myself, and I was like, I kind of hope I prove myself wrong again, because that's A, more interesting to a reader, and B, shows that humans can make mistakes and that research is a growing, breathing thing, and we need to find new ways of conducting it that allow it to have that humanity and allow it to have that breathing room to get as close to the truth as possible.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is really resonant in this, it's not necessarily a movement, but like this kind of shift in methodology where we're not talking about methods in like actual like tangible actions, but like what is water as a method? Like if we're looking at water
Mm,
and the way that it's flowing through a river, like what does that look like in the human experience? And like that can be theoretical and also like what does like the properties of water contain and what does it mean for water to be contaminated and happening and impacting people? Like there's a way to bring it into the humanity and the physicality of like what we're experiencing, but it doesn't actually like like I feel like academia doesn't take it as seriously because it is not um something that can be replicated or something that can be um centered in this kind of white you're like you're like Eurocentric um ways of thinking, like this westernized ideology around like medicine or
mm,
um specifically research, or like this kind of competitive capitalistic what can I do and how can I sell this, because methodology and theory is also things that need to be sold. How many times you get cited is so important, and the whole idea of like publishing or dying. Like if you don't keep publishing, like you'll fail as a researcher. And it completely tears away the humanity of the process of why I think a lot of like Black, brown, and queer folks do research, because we go in there being like, we want to do something different for our community. And they're like, yes, but where are the numbers? Like, how do you come up with these ideas and these thoughts? And there's some like spaces in like the social sciences that allow for that flexibility, but like those are like hard sciences are the only things that matter. It's not the soft ones. It's not the things that you have to read in all of your like undergrad classes that like have to do the like baseline of why you even go to school, but none of them are important. None of them are like matter in any way, shape, or form. So it's very interesting to me how research has moved away from this critical thinking space and more into this
mm,
production space. And
mm,
the thing that I'm struggling with a lot more is like the stories, the things that I think are actually impactful to the broader audience and also in academia, like what's actually the most like impactful to the way that people are thinking is storytelling. And storytelling
Mhm.
is a very pivotal part of doing research. You have to deduce information and then tell a story based on what you're seeing, but it's only your perspective. And a lot of people don't necessarily have advisory boards or other people looking at their research to explain these things. But when I'm writing an article, especially if I'm writing a theory paper, that theory should tell a story about something happening in the world. And so, what makes this theory paper anything different than an Octavia Butler novel? Or what does it make
Mhm.
it any different than this podcast conversation? Like, I'm like
Mhm.
figuring out something that I'm seeing and then turning it into something else that somebody else can read. And so, I think one of my TikTok says like research is just like a whole bunch of thing and everybody is a researcher. It's just like what is held in higher regard is the folks who live in a system that they had to struggle or perform to get into. Because even I read my my what do you call that? My application essays, and I'm just like, "Who is this?" Like what? Like this feels so fake. Like I feel so I feel like there's this book that I really really like, and it's a poetry and like little short essays. It's called Trickster Academy, and it's written by this indigenous person who was going through a PhD program and was just kind of like. I am not actually an imposter. I'm actually somebody who tricked their way into this system and now I'm doing the thing I want to do, but I have to do it in a way that like is appeasing to this public, but it's also like the
Mhm.
thing that is bringing my community back into it. So it's a very fun balancing act to do the good work that you want to do in academia uh, without setting off any red alarm or like just hot
Mhm.
alarms that people are like, no, this person has to drop out because like we need to kick them out of the program because they're shaking the table a little too much. But once again, I am an Aries and my baseline is shaking a table.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know how to stop. So I get to now talk about all the things I actually want to do on TikTok rather than fighting with folks in the programs or folks in the university who are like, it can't be done this way. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to talk to the people who actually get it rather than waiting until I have papers to then be like, and I'm going to push the narrative. So figuring out ways to like talk about research in academia. Um, in a way that connects with people feels more important to me than actually the process of getting this degree. But then also, I could write a paper about this process because that's how academia works. So it's fun. It's a fun game. It's a fun mind puzzle, but it is exhausting and hard to navigate.
Well, I think that game is currently happening because these new research methods and these new ways of finding information and codifying information decentralize the university, and they decentralize this way of knowing that has been the way that people know for hundreds of years. And by people, I mean the rich white male people know for hundreds of years. And so by challenging that, you're challenging these systems that allow them to capitalize on the output of those universities, that allows them that challenges the hierarchies they've created. Because I mean, like you said, everyone is a researcher, and if you start saying that too much, then all of a sudden universities are like, well, great, now everyone knows that they have the power to do this on their own and they don't need us, and now we can't make money off of people anymore. And I
Right.
think that's where a lot of that fight is coming from, is now that we are taking people to heart, like Foucault, who was calling these things into question 100 years ago, almost like
Exactly.
75 years ago. And we're listening to our theorizers, we're listening to our researchers, and we're realizing that they were talking about things that we could have been doing this whole time, but we were not empowered to, or we didn't have the ability to push as hard as we can now. um but ultimately, I think what it is we are millennials, especially because I'm seeing this shift. A lot of people who are in PhD programs now are millennials. That's just
Right.
how time works. But millennials come and have been brought up in this world of interdisciplinary thought. Like,
Yes.
I remember in undergrad taking certain classes, like taking a journalism class and having them be like, okay, but what else are you doing? Tell me about these other classes. How does it relate to this class? When I was in my first master's program, I was a graduate teaching assistant and I taught in a singing for non-majors course. And the paper at the end of it is I made all of my students write a like 3-page essay about how that class that was a non-major class uh, helped them with their major, like how it related to their major. So it made them think about the connections between those two things. And then I would sit in vocal pedagogy courses where we were studying physics and the physics of the human voice. And then we would go over to the medical school and sit down with these people studying to be ear, nose, and throat doctors and say, okay, let's talk about this. Let me tell you what it's like to sing, and you tell me what's actually happening inside my body at this moment. And I think we enough of us have now grown up in this world of thinking not necessarily outside of the box, but thinking with multiple boxes stacked on top of each other, that we've realized how necessary it is to combine these things, to combine theater with poetry, with sociology, to
Mhm.
take science and put it into your mathematics and your painting course. Like, all of these things need to work in tandem because humans are made up of multiple pieces. We aren't
Mhm.
an individual thing. So therefore we need to study in ways that allow us to express that humanity.
Yeah, and I think one of the best parts about my program is that it is inherently interdisciplinary. We are focusing on taking classes outside of the school of social work because we understand that the multifacetedness of working with people and working with community requires more breadth of understanding than other professions who are like, oh, sociology, we stick to looking at numbers and stick to looking at systems and have our own like methodology and theory that like we've been using for the past like 300 years, 400 years actually. I have like, as somebody who got their undergraduate degree in sociology and was like, this is like one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. And now in a PhD program where I'm like, sociology irritates me to no end. It's such a fascinating journey, but it's very important that sociology exists. But it is not sometimes doing the helpful thing that I want to do, which is how I landed in social work. But one of the things I have been privileged in doing is being at the University of Washington. We have an American Indian and Indigenous Studies program, and this program has a certificate program for PhD students and master's students. And so, all of my favorite classes have currently been in the American Indian and Indigenous Studies department because the scholars there who have created some of the like most interesting theory and methodologies have are like just like powerhouses. So like one of the folks who I love dearly and took Indigenous theory with was Diane Millian, and she has this theory called felt theory, which is just like this idea that as Indigenous folks who have survived like the Indian schools and these kind of like um, tearing away of identity, like folks can talk about what that feels like, or they were told not to talk about how that feels like, but you can see how it's felt in the way that they've moved through existence
Mm,
since like the 50s, 60s, 70s. And those schools are still open and still exist. And some have been given back to the Indigenous community, some of them have not. But how that historical trauma is felt in the way that people move through the world. And that is theory in itself. And so being able to
mhm,
think through, um, once again, water, feelings, the way that we're related to all other living things. Like now I've moved to saying, like, oh, I'm in community because I'm with all my relatives. My relatives are animals, my relatives are plants, like relatives are strangers, but like everybody is a relative to me because we are all connected through the earth and the land that we move through and like utilize. And so why are we not treating each other and moving in that way as a society? So a lot of the which some folks would say not pragmatic, but pragmatic ways of me thinking through academia have to be rooted in the way that Indigenous and Black folks have moved through the world of like, what do you do with so little when you know that there is so much that you have to offer, but those things are being taken away from you? And so it is really nice to see this shift. And like you said, like a lot of millennials are getting PhDs. We're like now sitting on the like cusp. Like most folks in my program are Generation Z, and I'm like a year away from being a millennial. So like we're old, y'all. Like, like it's a lot.
Hmm.
Like the millennials are now getting pushed into these faculty positions, and now Gen Zers are the PhD students, and soon that will like also be different. But I think with that thinking that you were talking about, it's really important to notice that like the critical thinking is still there. And
Hmm.
I think that the current administration and the world we live in now is like knows that taking that critical thinking away is important, but also capitalism is pushing folks away from academia more and more because it's so expensive to get degrees and then you're sitting in debt for so long. And so why would you go to a program just to get a degree that you hope will make it easier for you to get the job you want when you can get those tangible skills somewhere else and do it differently? But like I think everybody has a role in society, and I think whatever when you're sitting in your purpose, that critical thinking just kind of comes with it. And I'm like really eager to get to a place where folks get to be critical thinkers again. Um, and a part of my research is looking at artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, and I'm seeing how these things can be beneficial and how they can be harmful, and the harmful is outweighing the beneficial currently. But I'm always very curious of thinking about artificial intelligence from this like indigenous way of knowing, or thinking about artificial intelligence from an Afrofuturistic view, and how those things, like I said, all live in these books and these poems, in these conversations that are not considered research, but tell bigger stories and tell bigger ways of thought than normal, just like I shouldn't say normal, but like the expected way of thinking about
Yes.
research. And I always go back to Octavia Butler because this kind of storytelling that was like future thinking, and it's like, oh, she can tell the future. Why does she know that like in 2024 we're gonna have a dictator to like why is Parable of the Sower happening in real time? I don't really like it, but like it's happening. And what she says in one of her essays, telling the future or knowing the future, is that what she did was just look at the pattern that currently existed and put it into the future. It wasn't
Yeah.
anything profound in like ways that she was thinking about it. She just said, well, like during the time that she was writing, it was like the Rodney King riots, and like everything
Hmm.
literally was on fire in LA. And so she was looking at that and was like, I'm gonna write a book about it. Like the so knowing that it's history, it's the cyclical nature of like things that happen, we need to like think about research as something that is moving and constantly changing over time. And why aren't we looking at the history to then talk about what's happening today? Or why aren't we looking at ancestors like ways of thinking are standing on their shoulders to build that theory further as the world changes and moves in way quicker formats than they were like dealing with. They were talking about stuff and being like, in the next like 50 years, it's going to happen where we're like, yes, soon this artificial intelligence will be taking over the world in the next 5 to 10. And like, what do we
Yeah.
do? What do we put in place to stop that from happening? So I think it's challenging us to like need to lean more into community more than ever. But we have systems in place that actively do harm and try to erode those kind of connections. And so I'm a lot of my research is trying to figure out like what does putting that connection back together, what does bridging look like? And that is why I took myself onto the interwebs and was like, let me talk
Yeah.
about research in a way that's tangible and like way that accessible, because people are not going to school. It's expensive to go to school. I get it. But like also people still love learning. Just like I said, academia,
Hmm.
hard, hate it too much. But I love learning. And I know that a lot of other people in the world also love learning and don't have access to the ability to learn in the ways that folks who go to academia do. But academia is not neurodivergency friendly. It's not POC friendly and it's
Not
not
yet.
queer friendly. Not yet. That is such a good way of framing it. It is not yet that. And I think the more of people like us trying to like enter those spaces and get the degrees that we need to change the way the system operates is so important.
Well, and I think that's just like you were saying with the cyclical nature of things. I think it's exciting as a researcher living right now. It's exciting to see this changeover beginning, because I mean, we're talking about a generation of kids who grew up reading dystopian young adult literature like The Hunger Games, like Divergent, like at the time Harry Potter. We thought it was so good for us. Um
I
and
know.
and I mean, I'm I don't want to get into that, but I just want to say we were able to get out of it the things that will push us forward. No matter
The
what's
boy,
happening with it now, we were able to
yeah.
get some good things out of it.
The
Um,
interpretation of the text is so much just as important as knowing that the person who wrote it was problematic. And I think that we also can hold
Absolutely.
both of those truths at the same time because the boy
Absolutely.
living in the closet underneath the stairwell and that not being inherently queer is such a weird way of thinking about the world.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there. That's
But
my
well,
quick.
but my point being, we had a generation or two, like both millennials and Gen Z grew up reading these books and being told that all it takes is one person, and being told that everyone is important. And we, like you said, we are the ones that are now starting to take those faculty positions, and we're the ones starting to push things forward. And Gen X, I'm not going to leave them out. Like, some of them are okay. but we're starting to see that phase out of old traditions because the people who held on to them aren't in those positions anymore, either because they're passing away or because they're old enough that they don't want to work anymore. And it's like, good for you, glad you can retire. I can't, I don't think I ever will. But we're seeing that changeover happen, and it's exciting to me because I think in 20 years, in 30 years, we're going to see academia being a much more inclusive space, being much more open to neurodivergency, being a space where those people that didn't see themselves as smart are being given a chance to research in ways that plays to their uh the ways that their brain works, um in poetry or in music or in movement, or if you're a tactile learner or a visual learner. I think we're going to come to this place in a couple of decades where those are the people who we will be seeing in those classrooms, because the people leading those classrooms have seen the need for that and have been trained from childhood to think that that is as important as it is. um but it
And I
unfortunately
will
takes 100, 200 years to get there.
Yeah, and I will say that there is spaces in academia within like ethnic studies and within
Hmm.
like any critical studies or like Indian and indigenous studies where those folks have been fighting for those like different ways of knowing for such a long time. And like the 60s and 70s is a great historical like point where they were like, well, now that we are trying to integrate the world, we have to learn, we have to think through these things differently. And so it is such a fascinating. Somebody is reversing and there's beeping. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's like I'm here. Like I'm just like I feel like I'm being silenced and oppressed by this beeping. And there's just still reversing.
we
I feel like they've
stand
reversed halfway
we
through
stand with
here.
truck drivers.
Look, I'm just like, why is this happening right now? And like they're just going slower. The closer they get to my building, it has stopped. It has stopped. Okay, I feel better now. I was like once again, my neurodivergent brain was like, I can't do both. This is too much.
Yeah.
But the point I was trying to make is that like there's so many folks who for years have already been trying to fight
Yeah.
to see themselves within academia and see the ways that they think and the ways that they do things within the spaces. And we're just standing on the shoulders of giants. And that we're
Yeah.
also in a time where so much information is being thrown at us at once at yeah thrown at us at once, and it is super interesting to see how academia just will look in the next like 5 years, especially after all of these like different federal cuts and like what people will have to do to get their research done. Like grants don't look the same. And so, like, what does it mean to have a mutually aid funded research project? What does it look like
Mm,
to have research done in such like a guerrilla kind of format? So there's like guerrilla researching where it's just kind of like
mm.
fast, dirty, messy, and it's done, right? Like it's like we
Yeah.
make it happen and we have a point and we move past it. But like that's gonna be what research has to be for a while. And when we try and come back from that, when we do have the funding and the numbers, what will we come back to the same kind of research we do? Because I just don't think we will. And I'd be really excited if we did it.
Yeah. Well, I think something that can be encouraging to us now is realizing, as we're talking about this topic, is realizing that we, like you said, we're building on the shoulders of giants. It takes a couple of generations to shift those things. I mean, we're talking about we're talking about an institution. Academia as an institution began almost 1,000 years ago. So like it takes a long time to move that rudder. And so it takes a couple of generations, and now we're seeing that we're seeing the children and the grandchildren of those people who were out picketing. I mean, I was talking to my parents the other day, and they were out at the No Kings protest, and they
Mhm.
said it's so cool because it looks like the 70s again. Like people are engaged again and actually thinking through things. um and but those protests wouldn't have happened, at least in the same way, if the 70s hadn't happened, if the 80s hadn't happened, if the 90s hadn't happened in the way that they did. And the same thing goes for academia. We are the products of advisors who have been trying to change the system their whole careers, and now we get to come in and do our little bit, and then the next generation will come in and do their little bit, and so on and so forth, and eventually that rudder will change for the better. I do think it'll change for the better because there's no stopping this ship now.
Yeah. There's
But
this
yeah, it takes a long time to get those things to happen.
Yeah, there's a documentary that talks about the like kind of shifting of comedy that one of my friends talked to me about, and I need to watch eventually. But the the documentary specifically talks about The Office and like specifically the US version of The Office, and how when The Office was introduced to the American context, everybody was really nervous because UK comedy is so much different than the US comedy. But at the time, The Office was something that was really popular. The UK version was really popular to an American audience. So they were like, we're going to make our own version. Like that one time they tried to make Skins the American version, and we were like, absolutely not, not the same thing. This is really
Yep.
strange. Uh, but they did that with The Office. And the reason why comedy is where it's at today is because that small, subtle shift of The Office existing. It shifted the way
Mm,
that people looked at comedy because it was so dry and slapstick, and the comedy was so in your face and different. But before we had sitcoms, we had these like very wholesome ways of thinking through things where The Office is just not. It's just chaos
yeah.
happening around you, but it also feels really relatable, and it feels kind of like a hug because you're like, this is how working in an office is. Like, there's weird personalities and there's weird things going, well, not weird, but like there's just all these different dynamics happening all at once. And I think once I heard that, I was like, what is my way of like slightly shifting this like rudder or like shifting the
Mm,
needle enough where like 5, 10 years later, we're going in a different direction. We're not on the same path forward, but I can't imagine myself as the only operator of this boat. Like this boat requires a lot of pulling and a lot of things to change this rudder because it's been stuck for such a long time. And so I am always like thinking about like what ways can I uplift way like different people's thinking or different practices that people are doing to help pull that rudder because what like you said, eventually it's going to be accepted, it's going to be known because we're going to be the ones who have the power within these institutions. And I mean, there's some that are like much more archaic, like the government, that will take a lot longer. But you think of people like AOC who like will grow and continue to grow into their role and hopefully not buy into the ways of being that will get you further faster.
Mm.
Because I think the ease of assimilation will always be the biggest battle between like change and where the system is currently, because assimilation means you get to where you want to go and you're rewarded for being the right person or the good one, when in reality, being the disruptor is, one, so much more fun, and two, will actually do the thing that we want to get done. But like I said, it takes time. It also takes a lot of grit, and I think a lot of like marginalized people are so primed to do it, but you have to be able to do it in community and be cared for and surrounded. And so partially the reason why I chose to go to the University of Washington is just because I lived here already, and so I knew if I stayed here I had a community outside of the school that like if
Mhm.
things got bad I always know that I'm going to land softly. And so being able to kind of escape and go into community and then come back and be like, I'm still able to do this. I took a summer off and now I'm doing other things and I feel better and I'm going to survive. And then by the winter, I'm like, hold on, how are we going to get through this? But it still is that need of community that I think is going to get me across the finish line. And I can imagine, when I'm doing my qualifying paper, when I'm doing my dissertation, I'm going to have this long winded, like 3 slides of like, these are all the people who helped me get here because I did not do this alone and it's impossible to
Mhm.
do this alone. And so, if anybody is thinking about going to a master's or a PhD program, do it in community and know that like you need to have as much connection as possible, and
Mhm.
you'll find it in the program as well, but having that outside community is also just as important.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, nothing happens in a vacuum. I
Mm-mm.
I remember as I was working on my thesis, I didn't even start sitting down typing anything until I'd been reading articles for about 3 months before I started writing, but I also had been literally everyone around me. I was just like, "Here's what I'm thinking about today. This is today's topic of wonderings," and just saying it over and over and over and over again until at some point all of these ideas and all of these theories that I'd been reading about coalesced into an actual, oh, this is what my paper's about. And then I
Mm.
sat down and wrote it. And same thing with my PhD topic that I'm proposing. I talked about it for months and months and to multiple people and people from different backgrounds and was like, this is what I'm talking about, and people being like, that makes absolutely no sense to me. And I'm like, cool, let me figure out a new way to say it. And then it distills it down into that thing that's like, oh, this is actually something I could write about because it's been on my mind for so long, simmering for so long. And it wouldn't have gotten to that point if I didn't have people around me who I could talk to about it, who I could express my thoughts to. And then those same people were also like, okay, you've been talking about this for 6 hours. Let's go do something else and breathe.
Yeah, I think that the repetition of talking about your dreams and your goals and your passions, one day you're going to say something to the right person and they're going to put you in the right headspace or give you that right amount
Mm,
of information for you to be like, let's do this. Let's like go off. And I tell people I'd like do this thing, especially in the way that I talk to, and also probably what I'm doing on this podcast, where I talk in these circles where I'll start something and then I'll start going on this path, but I always make my way back to my point. But I say that because I think that that's also the process, right? Like you're like, I have this
yeah.
idea and I'm going to keep talking about it and I'm going to then start talking about something that's like completely unrelated but kind of tangentially like connected, and I'm going to get to where I need to go. But like this analogy metaphor kind of space of how we're always in this cycle is so important to like the process of research and the process of dreaming, and creating new worlds. Because I think a lot of the times, we minimize research to like this will impact this population or this will impact this way of thinking, but like you're creating alternate realities that don't exist currently. You're
Yeah.
creating whole entire ecosystems that don't exist because you're thinking about something in a different way. Then you're like, well, what would this possibly look like in like a microcosm? But like, what? How do you expand it? How do you scale it? How do you make it bigger? And I don't just like let that live in the realms of like helping professions or like hard sciences, but like what is a world that is thinking about systems that love them? Like that's like such a radical way of thinking. And in my head, I'm just like, it's really simple. Like if a system loved me back, it would do the things and move in a way that challenges me and helps me grow and also makes me feel secure and safe. Like does that
Mhm.
look like? I can simplify it and I can talk about it really small, but like for it to fit into research, I have to think about it from all of these different angles and all of these different perspectives. And that's the process. But I just like always appreciate just like talking to someone about my ideas and then them being like, this is absolutely absurd. But like this one thing you said makes sense to me. And like maybe you should lean into that. And I'm like, okay, I'll lean. But like being open-minded and willing to adapt was something that one of my professors told me was the reason why I got accepted into the program was like just my ability to be like, okay, I took that feedback and now I'm going to immediately implement it because that's going to help me get where I need to go. And I
Mhm.
feel like once again, like the identities that you hold also play into those factors, like the way that we as queer people have to adapt to our surroundings immediately, depending upon what's safe and what's not. Like how that plays out in all of the other things and the roles that you have is why we are so effective and important and need to be in these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on top of that, there's this it as I was talking about going on to a PhD and trying to figure out a topic, I kept hearing from everyone, "Oh, you have to it has to be something new." Like when you do a PhD, it has to be a completely new idea that no one's ever thought of before. And I was like, that's not possible. Like I know that's not
Exactly.
possible. There were writers of the Old Testament who said there were nothing new. So like I know that's not possible. And my master's thesis advisor kind of helped me come to this realization that it's not necessarily finding something completely new, but it's naming something that hasn't been thought of in that way before, or taking these disparate pieces from different places, putting them together and saying, no, look, these go together. um
Yeah,
and
one of
that
the
really helped break me out of that rigor mortis of fear.
Yeah, one of the things I tell my like advisors and like anytime I'm like in a class and somebody's like, "Oh yeah, your research has to be new. It has to be added to the academic lexicon." And I'm just kind of like, "Yeah, I'm kind of just like talking to community and taking the ideas that they have and then putting them there." Like at no point
Mhm.
in time is like the way I'm deducing it and the way that I'm like synthesizing it may be novel and new, but like the information is not coming from some like random headspace thought that I had. It's
Yeah.
like I'm living my life and things happen and I'm like, yeah, like this is not being seen in the literature. Let me put it in the literature and it's great because I don't think, and I think that's like the individualistic nature of academia and why academics feel so like I have to work alone and I have to do all of this in a like vacuum where it's just me and my mind and like me taking notes and waking up at 3 a.m. and being like I have to jot this down in a journal. Like it's just like yeah, and I could also talk to my friends about it and then like just keep it growing. And I don't think researchers in the 1600s and the 1700s who came up with all of these processes were really thinking about community when they were coming up with these ideas. And so uh, the shift in research of like rather than talking about like focus groups, somebody being like, oh yes, I went to a healing circle and I listened to their conversations and synthesized that is such a shift in like, oh, I conducted a focus group to I went into community and listened to a conversation and this is what we pulled out of it. Like just that
Mhm.
language shift is such a pivot from what we are told academia is supposed to be. And so hopefully that keeps pivoting. And there's more academic poetry because honestly, that was one of the funnest things I've ever done. And I think everybody should do it at least once because it was just
Honestly,
so cool.
honestly, now I want to see someone write their dissertation as an epic poem. Like, just please, just the whole thing. Just do it. Go for it.
I need those to exist. And I like once again, like this indigenous scholar kind of space that I'm in has been so fun because I'm able to read pieces where they fuse like these
Hmm.
paragraphs with poetry and how the poem actually like tells the story of the other pieces of research and like transcripts that I have. Like, how do you do that? Or one of the things I did for that class was ask different chatbots, how do you define indigeneity? What does that look like? And being able to
Hmm.
be like, this is Chat GPT's theory of indigeneity and see how it doesn't look like indigenous
Hmm.
like research. Why is that? Like, so now we know that like if Chat GPT is going to be the normal and it's talking about indigenous people in this way, how do you get in front of that? How do you get behind that? Like, what is the
Yep.
thing that has to happen to change that? So we can think about these things in such creative and unique ways. And I think that the more creativity and imagination that's put into research will actually create knowledge that is intersectional, is accessible, is neurodivergent, because I think that most of the best research is done by neurodivergent people because we're just not looking
Oh
at the
yeah.
thing in the same way because like you said it is novel when I'm just like my brain doesn't work the same way as yours does and this other perspective is just as important.
Yeah, I think it's so cool to me as someone when I wanted to go further into academia, I was like, oh, I need to prepare to be the only gay person in this room. I need to be prepared to be the minority in all of these situations. And then I got there and I'm like, there are so many queer people around me. And I think it's because queer people are able to look at things outside of traditional ways of looking at them. Like you said, I think minority groups in general are able to take their experiences and focus them into new and engaging ways of finding information and researching and methodology because we are so used to not following the pattern that we come into these spaces that are so used to patterns and we say or we could do this or that.
Exactly.
And so these spaces are becoming more diverse because these are the people that are like, actually, I want to go on and continue studying and I want to talk about it this way and I want to do that. And it's I think that's what's going to be the savior of academia is not straight white people. Sorry to the straight white people listening. We're glad you're here and we're glad you're allies,
Exactly.
but you're not the future.
Yeah, I mean, because you've been the past for such a long time. Like make a little space for the future to be all of the other like colors of the rainbow and like all of the other people who exist.
And I was having this conversation a couple of days ago with some people about the misconceptions about ancient philosophers and where they came from and where they got their ideas and how we have all of these paintings of them as these old white men. It's like, well, actually, that person was from Africa and that person was from Turkey and that person was from the Middle East and that person was from over there. And they were all repeating philosophy that had been around for the last 3,000, 4,000 years before they said it. So again, it's about that decentralization from traditional ways of thinking about these things.
One of the things that I think is really cool about numbers and like when we talk about like quantitative data is that if you go back to the root of like zero, like what does like infinity and what does like nothing look like, it comes from India. A lot of people like the way that if you looked it up and Googled it, it would say that it came from like some European like science person who was just talking about like there has to be nothing like like infinity and but in reality, in India, they had already came up with a concept of zero, and there's like specific language that like talks about this. But the way that they were talking about numbers and like fractions and things all came from the way they were looking at flowers. Like it all
Mm,
stemmed from art and nature and like this kind of like way of like, oh, we're looking at this and this causes this rupture in the framework of our society, and like how do the ways that flowers shape create circumferences and creates pi and creates all of these concepts that we are taught in school, but it
Mhm.
came from flowers. So
Yeah.
how can you sit here and tell me that like me thinking about research from like a perspective of water, our perspective of survival, our perspective of love is not possible, and I can't quantify that? Like what do you mean? Like if flowers can be quantified, why can't like
Yeah.
love or these other big concepts be quantified? Because in one of the papers that I sent you, that's specifically about like queer and trans students experiences at like research universities, and like how like the final like component of it being like a queer and trans of color like perspective or analysis, is because like our positionality made this possible to be seen like this. And like quantitative criticalism, which is a like methodology, is like talking about like the way you ask questions and the way you think through things in your research process impact the information you get. And so a cishet, like white person looking at these questions are not going to get the same information that I'm
Yeah.
going to get from them. And that's just a fact. And so we have to have the multitude of perspectives because they need to be in conversation with each other. Um, and I think one of the fun things about academia is that though there's papers and like different terminologies for writing a dissenting response to somebody else's really bad way
Mhm.
of doing the research, because they did it in the 60s, 70s when black and brown people just couldn't be there. And so
Yeah.
like we have to look at it differently. Our queer people weren't centered in the conversation. So we need to be there to like continue to challenge these very archaic ways of thinking. Because one of the jokes I did in my first class when we were doing our theory was the four white men in Vienna who came together and was like, this is how research works in the 1600s. Like they were just like, this is it, this is the structure. These four white men in Vienna have been hold a chokehold on research for 400, 500 years now. And what do
Yeah.
you mean I have to do what they say? I don't need to. I
Great.
can do whatever I want.
Yeah, and everyone was completely right about everything they said in the 1600s.
Like exactly. Like it's
Completely. They
like
know so much.
they just experienced so much life, and we're not like they were also rich. Like they also had so much money, so they weren't even giving the narratives of like the common folk. Like I'm sorry, it's wild to
Yeah.
think about the fact that that is the thing that this all of this is based on.
Well, that actually leads us into our audience questions. So we're going to move forward, and we have an audience question from @Vishanse on Instagram. And grab onto your seat because this is a deep one. So, why do we pretend to be so progressive, but when loud voices get up and speak to dissent against the current political climate, they are silenced?
Okay, so the easy answer is that's how the system was created. Now,
Yeah.
now, I think that that is a little bit too simplistic to really capture the actually insidious ways that our system operates, because the goal is to not actually like destroy the dissenting narrative, it's to absorb it. How do I
Mm,
make this group of people not mad at me anymore by taking the little bits and pieces that will make them okay, like feel okay about it, um to then be like, but the ones that are radical, those are the ones that are problematic. You need to not like them, and we can push them out of the picture, because then that doesn't cause the actual transformational change we want. It moves the needle just enough to make the system make you feel comfortable enough to live in it. So,
yeah.
a great example, which I learned in my feminist theory class, and it had me shook to my core, was this idea of homo nationalism. Homo nationalism is not about gay nationalism. It is about homogeneity being the goal of any nationalist like propaganda. And so all of this is to talk about 9/11. Why am I talking about 9/11? Because it is a pivotal point in American society that we all know it
In the
well.
words of Mariah Carey, you don't want me to talk about 9/11.
You don't. Mariah Carey's what album was that? Honestly, we could get into that. Like, this is the
Uh,
true gay agenda, is us
was
talking
it
about Mariah
Honey?
Carey.
No.
I think it was
What was
Honey.
it?
It was one of
I think it
them.
was.
But Mariah Carey being true 9/11 energy is the important part of this conversation. But what homo nationalism did it during that period of time was actually position and caused the problem we're having today with Palestine and it like in the Middle East because it was like, well, actually, let's look at this South Park episode, and Osama bin Laden is gay. Like that's the reason why he's doing all of this is because he is gay, and so being gay is the problem. But when queer people in America was like, actually, that's not true. Like that is not the problem. Actually, in that country, they are homophobic, and they have all of these different laws around like same-sex couples and like sodomy and like all this other stuff. And so like that's the problem. American like politics was like there's a thing. If we can point to them and say they're like archaic and problematic because they don't
Mhm.
understand that queer people are real people who like deserve rights, we can now make a whole group of people all of a sudden comfortable enough to be like, yes, Palestine is the problem. The
Yeah.
Israelites should have the right to destroy this whole entire group of people because they're homophobic. So, like, how has history constantly done this where they've pulled us down and been like, hey, you shouldn't be that mad about this because actually this group of people are horrible and we're a little bit better. And so don't be mad. So, the reason why folks do not actually want to shut down everybody, they want to like kind of dilute the anger, is because then we can continue to be the country that we have always been, which is oppressive and problematic and hurting certain groups of people. That's why you see trans women and trans men being murdered at higher rates and that not being actually like law changing, like narratives like why like we shouldn't let anybody die but like these trans folks because they're just so different like the
Mhm.
difference allows them to be the ones who need to be pushed to the margins because like we have gay marriage now and that's enough or we can like we have these things and it's enough and so some people get it but
Mhm.
some people don't and that divides us like that divides us as a queer community that divides us as like BIPOC folks. Like that just divides us and it makes us do the infighting that then allows folks like this current administration to exist and be in power. Like the
Yeah.
point is to make us fight and not understand that this is actually propaganda that is being used to control us. So I don't know if that answered the actual question, but it did take me on a tangent to talk about Mariah Carey and 9/11, and I feel real good about it.
Well, I mean, and absolutely, it. I think the example that springs to my mind of what you're talking about is West Side Story, in that you have this group of white boys who are it's a group of Italians and Germans and Polish and all like they themselves like 10 years earlier were the immigrants, and they're all of a
Exactly.
sudden being told by the government, actually it's the Puerto Ricans that are the problem, go after the Puerto Ricans. And there's a whole scene where Doc comes in and he's like, you all realize that you are the same people. Like, you are also this. Like, how are you forgetting that just because they happen to look slightly different than you guys? You don't see this because the government is telling you at this point in history, these are the people that we don't like because these are the people challenging the status quo. You've assimilated. You're good now. You are what we want. You are that homogenous white goop that we can control. Now this group of people is out of line, and we need to force them to do what you did in order to make sure that we keep the status quo. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's the
absolutely.
reason why. That is the reason why we're getting rid of art programs in waves because it makes sense.
Yeah.
And people are telling the narrative correctly in the arts, and that's why they're being cut because
And why education
control.
is being attacked, and specifically higher education, because higher education teaches you how to ask questions, and you don't want people to ask questions, and you don't want critical thinking because those are the people that are going to rise up against despotism.
Yep, and that's why having accessible education is so important because we need to be teaching people. outside of academia that you need to be critical thinking about all of it and like why these histories matter. And I love the internet and hate it at the same time because there is a capitalistic machine, and it's like any Google search I have will have the thing that gives like that the thing that is paying Google at the very
Hmm.
top of it. We have those little ad sections that we all get at the top of Google, but in reality, like there is so much information, free information that we can access online. And I really love this pivot in academia to have open access articles more often so that people can
Hmm.
actually get the things behind the paywalls to learn the information they need to be more critical about society. So once again, the pivot is happening. It's happening slowly but surely. But yeah, that's the reason why the federal government is just shutting down anything that has DEI in it,
Yeah.
because they know that if we know too much, we're gonna do something about it, and they don't want us to know too much.
And that's why countries like Germany have free higher education, because they realized
Exactly.
what happened and they were like, nope, we can't have this happen again. So here, you get to be educated for free because we need this to not happen again.
Yeah. And so yeah, it just all comes back to the dissenting voices are not ever going to go away. It's more of how do we as like bystanders and listeners actually hold their reality and their truth, and then figure out how we're going to ask the government to shift it. Even if it isn't the exact thing they're asking for, what is the shakeup that we need to have? Because
Yeah.
those things happen. You have to have some political candidate during the presidency to talk about climate change for there to be some level of climate change conversation when that person, like when the other person inevitably gets elected. You have to have those different opinions to cause the like change that we want to see in the world.
Yeah. And that brings us to my favorite section at the end of the podcast, the synthesis questions. Do, do,
Oh my gosh.
do. And these are the questions that I ask every guest. And it's a series of 7 questions because that's where my mind stopped coming up with semi-interesting questions. So we're gonna take it. And I don't want you to think about your answers too much. Just
Okay, I can do that.
whatever comes to mind first. So question number 1. What is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
I will play so many video games. It is actually it's like unrealistic how much time I spend playing video games, and allegedly I'm getting a PhD. The balance is not there. I don't sleep most days because I want to play my video games and dissociate for a second into an immersive world where I have to use every single sense to engage with it. Um, yeah, so it's video games. It's always video games.
What is your favorite setting for working on your research?
In the middle of a park on a very sunny day, specifically writing in a like old notebook that like I'm trying to like fully fill out because once again, having ADHD, like just like being neurodivergent, like I've never finished a full notebook with notes. Like I always like start and then eventually we get halfway through and all of a sudden the notebook is sitting on my desk and I've never touched it again. So I need to be in a park with like an actual physical notebook, writing in it. I need to be completely unplugged from the internet and not being able to access anything because then I get to think for myself and I don't get to have the opportunity to pull from other sources to come up with the ideas or the things that I'm thinking about.
Like that. What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And it could be good or bad.
One of my advisors told me at the beginning of this PhD journey that being a PhD student is about thinking. And so you're being a PhD student all the time because you're thinking all the time. I don't think they should have told me that because now I'm like, I'm always working. Like, I'm always working. But in reality, like, it is that. Like, I will be in the shower and I'll think about like my like methodology for some like paper I'm writing and be like, oh, where's my phone? I gotta get to my phone right now. I gotta put it in my notes app because you are constantly thinking, and so you're coming to some like really interesting ideas in dreams and in passing or doing a workout or in the shower. Usually those are when my ideas come.
Oh yeah.
So you're always doing your PhD work, you're always being a researcher.
You know those moments when you can't actually physically write anything down.
It's so bad. It's so bad. I lose my
um
mind.
Oh yeah. If we could get any kind of wearable tech, it would be a wearable notebook that would just pop up.
I
It'd
could
be
just
so
boom, here
helpful.
we are.
Yep. If you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
Oh my gosh, that is such a big question. So I'm in social work, and social work is such an encompassing and broad kind of idea. But if I really got to like pull back and think about like some other program I would go into, oh gosh, this is so hard. I think ethnic studies, I think the thing that I would wanna
Mm.
research more is, like, the ways that gaming, like, specifically D&D and character creation is actually, like, a gateway drug to, like, gender euphoria and, like, ways of, like, navigating
Ooh.
gender. I'd much rather be doing that. That.
It's
I
like
would
it's like imagination drag.
Yeah, like what does it mean to like think about yourself outside of your own body and play a character? And then what kind of ways are you like playing out certain like subconscious thought about yourself in these make-believe characters? Because I have DM'd a couple of like campaigns now, and I sit there and because like I said, I'm always in my PhD mind, I'm always thinking about things. I'm kind of like, hmm. I know my friend is going through this thing right now, and I'm now watching it play out in real time in this campaign. I hope this is like something they're thinking about while this is happening and they're coming to some conclusions. But maybe I'll check in with them later
Probably
about like,
not.
hey, you know, when you were playing your character today and like this outburst happened with the character, I think this has to do with what's going on right now in your life. And like, let's talk about it. Like, what's going on, sister? Let's like really get into it.
I love that. That would be such an interesting paper. Um, who is one other academic whose research you really admire?
My gosh. I talk about Octavia Butler enough, like so much. But like I know that she is not considered a academic because she is an author. But like when I think of academics, and I've talked about this enough that like I think everybody is a researcher. So I think right now the person that I'm obsessed with the most is Bell Hooks and just like this kind of concept of love. It keeps coming back up in the work that I do. And so I keep pulling from that. Um, but yeah, a lot of indigenous scholars, I could just like send you a list. I'm like really
Go
getting
for it.
into I'm just like getting into indigenous scholarship and like how fun it is. Wait. Oh, this is on YouTube. People are gonna physically see this. So people will see me pull out books off my bookshelf as I like go
Do
and
it.
grab them.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I'm like, this is now a moment for me to just like showcase all the things that I have on my bookshelf that I'm obsessed with right now. But this book, it's called Beyond Settler Time. It's by Mark Rifkin, but it talks about like temporality and like what time does to sovereignty, and how when you
Mm,
think about time in history and like what time does to the way we think about Indigenous people or the way we think about safety or society, like how this is all created by settler time and like what the white nationalist idea of time has like created to like what is a work day and why does it have to be 9 to 5, and also is everybody's work day 9 to 5?
looking at you, Henry Ford. Ooh,
it's it was created by a white man, that's all I'll say.
it was. Yeah, it was. Cool. I'm gonna look up that book because that's really intriguing. And I think it's important just for a moment to really acknowledge, yeah, I also agree that non-academic authors are also researchers and they are important. That's how academic research gets disseminated to the masses. If we didn't have artists, if we didn't have authors, those ideas would die in libraries.
And that is the reason why TikTok University is so important and why folks on TikTok are looking for ways to learn, and
Mhm.
why, even if you do not feel like what you are saying and putting out there, that somebody is watching it and learning something from it. Because I promise you, I made that video about talking about my like ideal dissertation topic of like how love and systems need to exist like in tandem, and I thought nobody was going to like it. I thought it was just like me practicing how to talk about my research and my ideas. And then it blew up. And I was like, wow, fascinating. People agree with me. this is so weird, but like people are eager to learn. Like everybody
Yeah.
wants to learn. Education is the thing that is stopping people from learning.
Yep. What is a question that you've never been able to answer?
So the joking one that came to my into my mind first was why I'm such a bad bitch, but that is not, that is not the question I've never been able to answer. We're still figuring it out. We're working on it. We're working on it. But I think the question that keeps me up at night that I am constantly thinking about is how do I change the mind of somebody who doesn't see me as a person?
Hmm.
I think about that a lot.
I'm gonna need to sit with that question for a while.
Yeah, I'm very curious of how to create humanity for someone or something that doesn't see me as that. So, like, one of the things I tell myself is that the worlds that I try and create have to have space for the people that I hate. And what does
Mm.
that look like? Like, how do I coexist with people and things that don't want to see me thrive, exist, or like even be alive? But because of the way that the world works, they have to also exist if I want to create a world of liberation. So like haven't got there yet, still an extremely angry Aries, and I will one day still be extremely angry, but somebody with that answer.
And that is what compassion looks like. And I'm not there yet.
Exactly.
And then the last question. What font do you wish you could present your research in?
Oh my God, Comic Sans. Let me tell you why. Because it's
You are
insane.
not the first person to say that. You are not the first person to say that. And that is wild to me.
I love a wild typeface. Like the handwritten script would love. Like anything that just isn't actually readable, so you can't actually know that I don't know what I'm putting on these slides and the things coming out of my mouth are actually important. I want it to be done in something that's just like, if you look at this slide, it looks more like art and it looks less like text. That's all I want.
Okay, I guess I really need to get outside of my my strict box on that because ooh, if I saw Comic Sans, I would run the other way. But that's a learning point I need to need to get
I
on.
think also if I could just do a presentation while like doing like while painting a picture and just talking to y'all about my research, I'd prefer that. Or me like doing an interpretive dance while still talking about my research. Like just finding other ways for you to be intrigued by the things I'm doing, but me not actually having to do it in this like stylistic expectation of what a presentation must be.
Nice. That's amazing. Well, thank you very, very much for being on the pod. Uh and I feel like I have much to consider now. much to I'll be laying in bed tonight just like, oh no, the people I hate are gonna read what I'm gonna write. You just unlocked anxiety in me that actually I kind of need to have unlocked.
I hold it very near and dear to my heart because I always think about like how is somebody going to argue against this point? Every time I write something down, I'm like, how would this person argue against me? And like I
Yeah.
need to understand how they would do that so I can make it tighter and stronger. It's a really fun exercise, but it also makes you really upset, and so it's hard to navigate all the time. But I really appreciate you for inviting me on the pod and also for you creating this space and this I would say even tool for folks to understand and get that um like I said, PhDs and master's degrees, they're all things teaching you how to do the thing you want to do. And so understanding that that's the freedom and space that you get to create, and that you also don't necessarily always need a degree to do the thing you want to do, especially
Yeah.
when federal government funding is gone and you actually can't do the thing you want to do, but you can do it in small ways in your community every single day.
Absolutely. And we will talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye.
I just so enjoyed having that conversation with Isaac and feel so much better about the state of academia and where things are going and who is getting these higher degrees. I think the world is poised for something great. And even though things seem dark and scary right now, I think we're on the precipice of something good. So I really hope that episode was as encouraging to you as it was to me, because it was such a pleasure getting to talk to Isaac. If you would like to submit a listener question for a later episode, or if you have comments, questions, concerns, freakouts, whatever, feel free to DM us on Instagram at hypothesispod, or send us an email at podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. That's podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Or you can send us a voice note at speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. Please keep the audio questions short, around 30 seconds, and make sure you're in a place where we can hear you clearly. But we're looking forward to getting more audience questions on future episodes. So please feel free to follow all of our socials. Like I said, our Instagram is at hypothesispod. You can also find me at Ira A. McIntosh on Instagram, or at the Gay Ethnographer on TikTok. Please go over to our Substack. That's iramcintosh.substack.com. That's iramcintosh.substack.com. And you'll find all of the articles we discussed posted there, as well as the video version of this podcast if you'd like to watch us. We're also posted on YouTube. Just find us. Just find us, please. Find us somewhere. Uh, Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen to us. And please share us with your friends. The only way for a podcast to grow is if you tell your friends to listen. And I personally would love to get this podcast out to as many people as possible so they can see that academia isn't scary and that it's full of people who care and want people to know things and want people to learn and want people to ask questions. This podcast is all about fostering curiosity and creativity. So please share this podcast with your friends and subscribe, rate, and review anywhere you listen to podcasts. So let's fight misinformation together and have a wonderful day. Go read a book.